Hey guys, I'm back. 2 weeks ago, I promised I would have a new video up on this channel, and it's been 3 weeks. Oops. Sorry I'm late. You know, Security Breach had some funny stuff in its lore. I know I'm not saying anything original here, but this game was kind of a huge mess, story-wise. Not even kind of, it just was a huge mess. On release, we got so much stuff thrown at us all at once, like the idea of there being 2 Vanessas, Burntrap's entire existence, Gregory, those tapes, Mike's room, the sticky notes, and more until it genuinely became incomprehensible. Now, in the years since the game came out, new entries have done a lot of heavy lifting to give answers to Security Breach's many questions. Patient 46? Oh yeah, that's evil, brainwashed Gregory. Freddy being weird? Prototype. But there's one big thing that's eluded us for quite some time. And I do mean a big thing, the Blob, also known as the Tangle. This guy's a headache, plain and simple. Fun little story about the Blob, but I didn't actually get to play Security Breach on launch due to going on a camping trip that very same day. On the night of, nobody had properly gotten the Burntrap ending, but the ending cinematic had been data mined. When I first saw it without any context, I assumed it was either some kind of weird flashback somehow set before Pizzeria Simulator, and that the Blob and Burntrap were Springtrap and Molten Freddy before they turned into their scrap forms. Obviously this is a weird conclusion to make, but I had literally no other context about the scene at the time. So you can imagine my surprise when a few days later I returned to the internet to find out that the real answer was nothing. Just a really underwhelming boss fight that seemingly undid all of Pizzeria Simulator. But of course, like I said, we know now a lot more about the story, and we know that this isn't the case. But we still have no real answer about the Blob, and I've been determined to find one. I've dug through the games and other theory posts, and I've come to a conclusion. And that conclusion is, I still have no idea what this pile of theory bait sludge is. So instead, I'm going to talk about 5 theories that other people have made instead. Okay, so before I actually get into the theories, let's establish what we know for sure about the Blob and its role in the story. We've got its design, which isn't super complicated, just a giant pile of cables dotted with burnt animatronic parts. There's a Mangle head, an Endo 2, a Bonnie head, Chica's head and torso, some Bonnie limbs, Baby's head, Puppet's mask, and of course the Funtime Freddy head on the front. Also, all of the heads have glowing red eyes. Seems like a simple enough design until we get a little bit closer and realize it's got some weirdness to it. The Puppet's mask is missing the tears, and both it and Baby's head have no glowing eyes. What's more, if we inspect the Blob's head, we can see that it's not really a Funtime Freddy head at all, just the shell. If you pay attention to the eyes, you can already start to see what's really under those faceplates. A Glamrock Endo head. But it's not just a Glamrock Endo head, it's actually a composite of a Glamrock Endo head with the lower jaw from Funtime Freddy's Endo, as well as his secondary faceplate slapped on top. It's not really any individual head, it's a mix of assets used to create the appearance of a brand new design, kind of like with Burntrap. We also know that it resides in the depths of the Mega Pizzaplex, slumbering beneath Freddy Fazbear's Pizza Place and above Burntrap's lair. It shows hostility to Gregory, but won't harm Glamrock Freddy, or at the very least it doesn't recognize him as a threat. However, it does show hostility to Burntrap, screaming at him and dragging him away in the fire ending. While the ending might not be the true ending, it doesn't make their relationship non-canon. Tales talks of an animatronic supervillain battling a tentacled monster, Gregory still draws them as enemies in ruin, and the Blob even has some claw marks on its face, which really can only have come from Burntrap. But then it does have a big impact in the story after Security Breach. For whatever reason, it woke up and tunneled out of the underground pizzeria and up through the raceway, causing an earthquake that destroyed the Pizzaplex. Given the Glamrocks are still broken, Freddy's body is where Gregory left it, and the free prize hasn't been restocked, the Blob seems to have broken out not long after Security Breach ended, which makes the timing even stranger. The Blob would then continue to tunnel through the lower levels of the Pizzaplex, and Cassie can even catch a glimpse of it, though it ignores her and just disappears into the walls. And that's it. That's all we have about the Blob, because it was almost going to be in Help Wanted 2, but they scrapped it very early on. That's all we have. A weird endo head, a bunch of past characters that were burned, red eyes except for the ones that don't have it, doesn't like Burntrap, makes funny tunnels. It's a very weird creature. Like I said, I've got 5 theories which I think are the main interpretations about the Blob. I'm going to weigh in on each of them and see if they answer 3 main questions. Who, what, and why. Who the Blob is and who made it, what it's made of, and why it exists the way we see it. So let's start with what I think is the first main Blob theory that was made. You know, the Blob does look pretty similar to Molten Freddy. It's a big clump of wires and multiple animatronics with a Funtime Freddy face on the front. Definitely similar, and we're obviously meant to think of Molten Freddy when we see it. So, the theory basically goes like this. After Henry's fire, rather than being destroyed, Molten Freddy survives and lurks in the pizzeria for many years. During this time, he slowly starts accumulating more mass, cannibalizing other robots that were burned in the fire and getting a new mask. Since he's still haunted by the dead kids, the Blob hates Afton, and so it attacked Burntrap in that ending out of revenge. So the Blob is Molten Freddy, made of him and a bunch of other burn robots, but why? Why did Molten Freddy choose to make himself some cable kaiju? Why did it just lurk in the depths for no reason and then randomly break out and start tunneling through the Pizzaplex? Why was he able to survive the fire? Molten Freddy being the Blob was a good theory for another time. A time when Burntrap was William, when Cassidy was the princess, when Gregory was the crying child. A time when Security Reach was still new and we still didn't fully understand the story that was meant to be told, or that would be told in later installments. At the time, it made sense for the Blob to be Molten Freddy because it seemed like all the old characters were just back like nothing happened. But now we know better. Now we know that Burntrap is the Mimic, and Molten Freddy has no real connection to that, which just makes even more questions about the Blob that Molten Freddy cannot answer. So this theory doesn't really work. Maybe the next one will. Hey, remember when FNAF AR existed? I've got such good memories of that game. I remember when I learned that they thought they'd get away with charging $70 for Toy Chica. Where was I? Oh yeah, right. Yeah, Blob. Another big candidate for the Blob is the entirety of FNAF AR. The idea goes that the Blob is actually made from the Fazbear delivery service animatronics. Vanny had infected all these robots and made them evil, and then the idea is she brought them all into the Pizzaplex and merged them into the Blob. Why did she do this? Well, another big part of FNAF AR is this silly little minigame where we collect light remnant energy and then inject it into our own animatronics. The Blob would then be basically her and Glitchtrap's equivalent, not of Molten Freddy, but of the remnant reservoir. In both the novels and the games, Afton gets his supply of remnant by melting down the haunted Freddy's robots into one single heap and extracting bits of them to use for his experiments. The Blob is made of a bunch of animatronics that have been filled with remnant, and now Vanny's got them all together in one body. But this leaves us with a lot of gaping holes and questions. For starters, why are these animatronics burned? The FNAF AR robots never got into fire at any point, and on top of that, there are some characters here who were never in FNAF AR, like Funtime Freddy's weird endoskeleton head and the puppet. Are those two just random outliers? And if the Blob is for remnant, why is it just sitting in a giant cave? We see in both the books and past games that to get usable remnant, you've got to keep it in a malleable state. The Blob isn't even close to molten. It's not like there's a big enough oven to hold it or tools to extract remnant from it in that cave. And of course, the issue of the Mimic and Vanny never actually doing anything with remnant or really having a need for it at all. It's not like the Mimic needs remnant to live forever, and it's strong enough without it. So this theory, while a bit better than the last, also still has some big issues I can't ignore. So this one has some overlap with the previous theory as well as another upcoming theory. The idea for this one is that the Blob is actually haunted by the collective victims of Vanny prior to Security Breach. We've got about a dozen missing residents and no sign of them anywhere, so why not the Blob? It's got a bunch of glowing eyes, so maybe it's a sign it's haunted by multiple victims. Like I said, this is a lot of overlap with the last theory in that it comes of the same general idea of Blob being created by Vanny and Glitchtrap as basically a giant remnant cow. But it also comes with the same issues. On top of that, if it's not the AR robots, then it creates the issue of where all these robot parts came from. One proposed answer is that's from the missing items in Rockstar Row, and while it's true some of the displays are missing items, it doesn't mean they wound up in the Blob. At least a few of these display cases house mini Music Men, and most of the Blob's parts are too big to fit in the cases. Even if the parts came from there, there's no reason to even do that, as it's not like the souls would be haunting those parts unless they were somehow stuffed into them before dying. But I'll admit, this theory at least has a better case going for it. There's a clear answer for who haunts it that actually ties into another major plot point in the story, but it still just leaves too much unanswered for me to settle on it. Tales. Tales from the Pizzaplex. I won't even lie, I do miss a good chunk of it. Like, half of the stories were pretty good. What I don't miss, however, is how allergic it was to talking about certain major parts of the game it was all about. Yeah, sure, we got a lot of Mimic content, but we only got one story about Gregory, and nothing about Vanny, Burntrap, or the Blob. The most we got was Mimic having rabbit ears and a single mention of an animatronic supervillain fighting a tentacled monster. But we didn't get any actual lore about it. We didn't get a story that says, hey, this is what the Blob is. But since that was all we had at the time, we tried to see if we couldn't make an answer out of that, and we did make an answer. one that turned the Blob from nothing but a passing remark in GGY into a huge part of Tales that spanned the entire book series. In the Mimic's very first appearance, it is shipped to the Pizzaplex construction site while a team is clearing out the remains of Freddy Fazbear's Pizza Place. It gets reprogrammed to break off the limbs and heads of endoskeletons, but immediately turns around and starts killing all of the workers, leading to them sealing off the entire building. When a group of teens break into the pizzeria, they discover the Mimic has a huge pile of corpses and robots in the center of the dining room. In one book, the corpse pyramid seems to be pulsing, and this led to the conclusion that it wasn't just a pile of flesh, it was kind of haunted. The massive pile of metal and dead bodies were the basis for the Blob. After all, we don't see a giant pile of flesh and robots and security breach, but we do see a giant living mass of animatronic parts lurking just beneath the dining room. So the idea went that all the people who died in the pizzeria became the Blob, explaining both where all that metal came from, as well as why it's so angry with the Mimic. Another overlapping theory is the idea that the Blob is in some part composed of pieces of the Storyteller, a giant machine that ran on the Mimic 1 program. It had massive cables that stretched through the entire Pizzaplex, and hey, why not? The Blob has a bunch of cables on it too. This theory is honestly really good because it basically explains everything. We got the source of the Blob's giant form, people in it, and a reason for it to hate the Mimic. But to be honest, I was never really fully on board with it. It doesn't explain where the animatronic parts fit into this, nor does it explain the reason why the Blob acts how it does, outside of just hating the Mimic. It's got the hostility down, but it doesn't answer why it started tunneling around the Pizzaplex and wreaking havoc. Oh, and there's the bigger issue of Tails no longer fitting in the story. Oops, sorry guys, all the books got thrown out. We can no longer definitively say anything from the epilogue or the Storyteller or any of the other books happened in the games. Well, it was fun while it lasted. Guess all that's left is... So this theory has heavy overlap with pretty much all the theories I listed already. And by overlap, I mean it's basically just interchangeable. Just take an existing theory, subtract any souls from the equation, and then add Agony as a source of supernatural stuff. Molten Freddy is the Blob, now it's the agony of the dead kids. FNAF VR robots, full of agony. Pizzaplex victims, their agony. Tales victims, also their agony. It's all just agony, the magic band-aid solution we can slap on without any regard for what it actually means. I don't really like this theory because it kind of just takes away from any significance the Blob could have. Sure, we have things that are alive through Agony like M2, but that works because it's not just being tacked on to explain everything. Agony doesn't explain every single thing about how M2 acts, but it's used to try to explain everything about the Blob when it just doesn't. Just being Agony doesn't explain why it has its weird behaviors and did all that tunneling. And ultimately, it's just kind of boring. Sure, maybe Agony could explain why it's alive and why it acts the way it does, but there are so many options you can go through before you have to make it something that ultimately does not need to be part of the Blob's lore. Of course, whether I like a theory or not has no bearing on its validity, and you should never trust someone who just goes off of personal preference for their theories, but still, I'm not really convinced of it. So, where does that leave us? 5 major theories down, and we're no closer to getting a good idea of what the Blob is. Well, I'm not gonna just leave it there, so, like the missing children's incident, I'm gonna go after a secret 6th option. Edwin Murray. We never do see his body, do we? He either escaped his office or his corpse was moved elsewhere. Either way, the story sets up at least a bit of a mystery as to what became of him. And Edwin, he's got deep connections to most of the characters in this franchise. He had a hand in making Bonnie, Chica, Foxy, heck, he even made a character that's basically a fusion of Baby and Puppet. But his most notable character is that of Mr. Helpful, who became the blueprint of both Helpy and Funtime Freddy. Hey, what if Edwin was the Blob? What if, after he died, whenever he died, his soul remained in some machinery and over time cannibalized other stuff to become this giant heap of living metal? If anyone has a real reason to fight with the Mimic, it's definitely Edwin. And the Blob's most prominent color is its red eyes, and these modern games have put a lot of emphasis on linking specific colors to specific characters, and hey, there's also a red old man in the Princess Quest games, and that guy also has a clear interest in stopping the Mimic. Maybe they're all actually the same. Or maybe this theory is just hypedora without any real substance. It doesn't have a way of explaining how Edwin became the Blob, and it doesn't explain why he'd do what he does. It doesn't explain what the Blob is made of, and it kind of just relies entirely on hoping that a DLC or a sequel will give some weight to it. By all accounts, it's not even a real theory. But I do kind of like it. There's something about making the Mimic's biggest rivals both related to the Murrays. And honestly, I just kind of want to see Edwin's story continue, even if it means he becomes a giant animalistic pile of robot spaghetti. I didn't like his death in Tales, specifically because I felt it took him out of the story too soon, and he should have a larger role in the furthering of the Mimic's plotline. I don't know. It'd be neat if he was still around, and maybe being the Blob could somehow bring things full circle. Probably not, though. So yeah, we're still left with no good answers. What a great character. What an amazing addition to the lore that I love having to acknowledge. I can't find any real good answer for its existence. Nothing feels like it fully solves the puzzle. The best I think I have is maybe it being Vanny's victims, but that basically requires her to turn all these dead kids into a giant amalgamation out of burnt robots she got from nowhere and then do nothing with the Blob. Like, what do we really know for sure? If I had to weigh in on anything about it, I at least think the reason it made all these tunnels and broke out of the pizzeria could have been to intentionally collapse the foundation and trap the Mimic underground. It's been a while since Security Breach, and the Blob has not left the building, so clearly it has some kind of attachment to the area. It just sucks that we don't have a more definitive answer for the Blob. It's clearly meant to visually call back to Molten Freddy, and that's definitely on purpose, but the purpose itself is just lost to me. Like I said, it's not like we ever see this thing being used for Remnant, so there's genuinely no strong answers that we have. If I had to rank the theories I went over in terms of what I think might end up being correct, it'd probably go something like Pizzaplex Victims, Edwin, followed shortly by the ARBrobots, Agony, Molten Freddy, and then the Tales answers in dead last. Now, this video was supposed to be out last week, but I'm gonna be honest, I'm going to have a bit of an inconsistent upload schedule from now on. I've got school, so that's taking up a big chunk of my time. I want to keep focusing on this channel, I want to keep making videos, and I will keep doing that, but I'm not gonna make any strong promises about when the next video will be out. I'm not gonna disappear for a whole month. I probably won't have a video next week. So yeah, I'll see you guys next time, whenever next time is. Carnival news tomorrow.